Now let's discuss the child find process. Where did the name child find come from? It was something that was a name that was coined by Congress to go out and find children who could possibly have disabilities. What Congress was saying was, even though we've set up this system to serve children with disabilities, we're not really identifying them. So they set up the child find process to find them at the earliest age possible. And so you see a lot of your child find activities are from 0 to 3, 0 to 5 years of age. It happens through screenings. These are not formal evaluations. They're just screenings for possible vision problems, possible hearing impairments, for possible developmental delays. There's other things they screen for also. Then what happened was, once they started these and implemented it, and they do screenings a couple times a year in places, you saw school districts become more and more inventive on how they went and looked for children with possible disabilities. They went to preschools to look for them. They held events where they did screenings. They partnershiped with other organizations to hold possible screenings for kids. And as this progressed, what you see is Congress has identified more and more children they want identified, such as minority populations, mobile populations. There's also some concerns about children who might be missed in the system after they're in school. So even though a child is progressing from grade to grade, that doesn't mean that they can't be found to possibly have a disability through Child Find. Now, Child Find is not limited to just screenings. If your doctor identifies a possible disability, that's a way to start the process of Child Find. If the teacher sees some problems in the classroom, that could be another way. If you're seeing problems at home, or let's say your child is reading and having difficulty reading, and you're seeing some problems and you want to express those concerns, all that starts the Child Find process. And then if they see that there may be a disability, then they start the evaluation process, or they at the very least do an intervention or begin interventions to see if they can't solve the problem in the classroom. So let's look a little bit at the rules and regs about Child Find, and then we'll move on to formal evaluations. So what is Child Find? Well, it's an affirmative duty upon the school districts to identify children with disabilities. If they don't, it's considered a denial of a free appropriate public education for a student, and their remedy is either compensatory education or tuition reimbursement. That is, if the parents privately place the child in order to get services, they can be reimbursed for that tuition. It's also a requirement for federal funding that every state have in place a Child Find system in order to receive their federal funding under Part C and Part B of IDEA. How is Child Find implemented? It could be yearly notices, it could be pamphlets, a lot of printed information is out there. I think you can see some developmental wheels where if your child is a certain age, it shows you what skills they should have at that point. All these things are intended to help you identify whether your child has a possible disability or not. There's information that's put on the internet. There's notice to private schools. There's screenings. Generally, they're for birth to 3 years of age, but they also screen older children occasionally to see if they also qualify. Screenings are basic tests. They're not a formal evaluation, so there's no requirement of notice and there's no requirement of consent. They're just, like I mentioned before, they could be vision screenings, they could be hearing screenings, they could be developmental screenings. Also, to qualify for Child Find, it can be identified by parents, identified by teachers or providers, or identified by medical providers. If anybody's seeing any problems, they can start the Child Find process. Here are the actual Code of Federal Regulations that address Child Find. Section 300.111. In general, the state must have an effect, and see that it's must, so it's a mandatory requirement, to ensure that all children with disabilities are identified, located, and evaluated, and that a practical method is developed and implemented to determine which children are currently receiving needed special education and related services. This is really just a reporting requirement also to help the federal government understand whether children are being served or whether they're not for funding purposes. The next section of rules and regs is really on the term developmental delay, and this is somewhat not necessarily controversial, but changes from state to state. So what the federal rules and regulations allow is some flexibility in the use of the term developmental delay. A state can adopt a definition of developmental delay for children aged 3 through 9, or even younger, 3 through 5. They do so. They may not require a local school district to adopt and use the term developmental delay. Most of them do. If the local school district uses the term developmental delay, it has to conform with the state's definition and the age range that the state has adopted. If the state does not adopt the term developmental delay, the LEA may not independently qualify children based upon the category developmental delay. Developmental delay is really just that your child is not developing age-appropriate skills. Nebraska does have a state definition of developmental delay. When we get to the eligibility requirements, we'll go through that more particularly, but let's just say that it has to be in the area of cognitive development, physical development, communicative development, social emotional development, or adaptive behavior development, and there must be some deviations in those in age-appropriate actions by your child. 2 standard deviations, and these are big words, but standard deviations just means a large difference between where your child is at. Your child is operating at age 5, and that's their level of cognitive development, but they're actually age 8. And so there's the difference, and that's what a deviation means. Also, Nebraska allows for opinion of qualified professionals in consultation with the family, could possibly qualify a child for developmental delay, or identification by a medical provider. And that pretty much sums up the child find area and the rules and regulations that are involved. So next, we will move on to the more formal evaluation process. That is, once your child is screened and determined whether they possibly have a disability under child find, and it's found affirmative that there could be that possibility, then they are evaluated in several areas to determine whether they have a disability or not. I've also included, just simply for your information, a 34 CFR 104.32. While this is not under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it is under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And as we talked about before, that applies to the schools and the states also. And this is just another definition of how child find is supposed to work. So take a look at it also, and just remember this is under Section 504, but it's also applicable to children under IDEA.